Today is Sunday, October 29th. Correct? I believe. Yes, October 29th. Well, Victoria is going to split pretty early, but we'll set our intentions and make aspiration. Making aspirations is Zonsar Khyentse Rinpoche, who we talk about a lot in this class, really stresses the importance of making aspirations. That to us, maybe it just sounds like not a very active, um, practical activity, but, we can tune our consciousness towards things that are, things that seem very far away or difficult, but making the aspiration does something in our mind to kind of tune us and set us in the right direction. So that's why we say this Four Immeasurables prayer. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings not be separated from the happiness that has never known suffering. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment, anger, and aversion. Victoria's going to speak for a bit. I have something to read, and then we'll meditate and do questions after.
I just wanted to reiterate basically a little bit based on what we were speaking about last week, which was breaking down the three levels of teachings, the continuing path of the Buddha Dharma as was taught by Buddha Shakyamuni. In the third spinning of the wheel, which is, the third time Buddha gave teachings, the stress was not so much on the emptiness, as in the first turning of the wheel, it was the emptiness of the individual, when we were looking at how suffering is created based on this kind of a conglomerate of what the self is. Second spinning of the wheel, the Prajna Paramita teachings, which gave us the emptiness of self and the object. In the third spinning of the wheel, we kind of have to abandon all conceptuality, and that includes the concept of emptiness. And the emphasis is on the luminosity of the cognizant aspect of awareness. And that is also what is referred to as the ground nature and the Buddha nature. These are all terms for exactly the same thing. Trungpa Rinpoche called it the basic human goodness, that nature. And Khandra Rinpoche says, and the teachings very definitively stress that is our basic human nature. The modes of operating outside of it are results of ignorance and self-grasping. And so Khandra Rinpoche, in a series of teachings called the mind training, which I hope that we will also start in a couple of weeks, just have to do more preparation and research for that. But Khandra Rinpoche stresses that we do not have to train our nature to be good. It is essentially already is good. What we train and what the path and the practice is removing the obscurations that prevent that nature from that prevent us from living through that nature and really being cognizant of it and manifesting through that lens, through that wisdom. We have to remove the veils of ignorance. We have to remove the veils of habitual negative emotional patterns. This removing allows that nature to surface finally to fore, and we can operate through that level of awareness. It is a level of awareness. It is where our awareness can abide. And so the path of practice is only to come to that inner point of our nature as it is. Right now, the way that we operate is through appearances and not through the nature as it is, but through habitual, lifetimes and lifetimes of patterns of ignorance and self-grasping. And so practice is what removes that. Uh, One more small point I wanted to clarify, the way that it is easy to think about emptiness is not like something in a nihilistic way, that something that is empty of this, empty of that, it's a point of us to become despondent and depressed. Think of emptiness like this, and I'll just give an example. Uh, a person that you hate right now, a person you call your enemy, a person for whom you feel a lot of bitterness and maybe years of bitterness. Suddenly, if we find ourselves in a position that we need a kidney donor, that person gives us a kidney and saves our life. This is how we should think of emptiness. We should think of emptiness as this infinite possibility and fluidity of reality, that the thing that we think and we're stuck on in such a kind of a fixated way, that it is so and so and so, and suddenly that fixation just breaks and reality becomes transforms and becomes something so utterly unexpected. This is how we should think of emptiness. We should think of emptiness as the nature of reality as completely fluid and open, that can transform in an instance and change completely everything. I think this is a very good way from that example to think how things can turn, thinking and keeping in mind that whatever the state of war and hatred exists right now, it can be surmounted and changed into a thing of peace and beauty. Yes, those are the possibilities, and that's how we should think of emptiness. We should think of emptiness as a paintbrush of reality that can create infinite possibilities. That's what emptiness is. The concept of this solidified, empty, like a container without anything inside it, that's a very dualistic uh, conceptual fixation. That's not really what we think of in the third jhana. We discard anything that's dualistic mind. We think, really, we only hold one vow, and that is the vow of purity for the world, what is called container in Buddhism, and the contents are sentient beings. We hold in mind two things, really one thing: the purity of the container of the world and the purity of all sentient beings. We think of all sentient beings in terms of their Buddha nature. Yes, they may be horrendous, lost, animalistic, dark, negative beings right now, because their mind is obscured by the veils of negativity, of the negativity of two kinds: afflictive emotions and ignorance, self-grasping and ignorance. But when those stains are removed from the ultimate nature, because the stains are not ultimate. What is ultimate is the Buddha nature, is the what Trungpa Rinpoche called the basic human goodness nature, the ultimate wisdom nature of awareness, when it is cleaned and stainless in its natural state. And just remember, that is our only vow in the third jhana. In Vajrayana, we always maintain a pure view, even though what may appear to us right now is in a very lost state. It's like thinking that a child who is very difficult right now, who's difficult to control, who doesn't understand so many different kinds of things, will grow up to be a good, sound human being. So we always hold that view of preciousness of human nature in its ultimate pure state, and in its capacity to be this wisdom, compassion thing. Because wisdom, the outcome of wisdom in its active form, what will manifest if our mind is in its wisdom state, will always be compassion. They're like the brightness of the sun and the warmth of its rays. So wisdom and compassion not to be thought of as separate things, but as what this human nature, what this sentient nature is. It doesn't apply only to humans, it applies to all sentient beings. And so just keeping that in mind, not becoming very fixated on the despondency, not becoming very fixated on the negativity of judgment, but keeping in mind very, very directly that the nature, the true and ultimate nature, is this nature of goodness, is this nature of wisdom, is this nature of clarity. And so keeping in mind we're practicing toward that. That's why aspirations are so important. We make aspirations toward the Buddhas because they remind us that this is where we will find ourselves, where when we finally turn around and look internally and persevere in this intrinsic purification and trying to become clear about what our nature is, we will wind up here in this Buddha nature space. So keeping in mind that that's our ultimate nature, not as being depressed, not as being angry, not as being jealous, that's temporary. Our ultimate nature is this wisdom, purity, compassion nature. That is the ultimate state of all sentient beings, and the teachings are very definitive about it.
Okay. Actually, why don't we meditate first, and then I'll do a reading. We won't do a review this week. We did one, I believe, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. For those of you who are new on YouTube, Meditation with Michael Imperioli, I think it's called. You can go to 2 weeks ago, which would be what, the 15th, or it might be the 8th of October. It has a detailed review of the technique. I don't do that every week because most of you are here week after week. So let's sit in the meditation posture and just really sit in the posture and relax, settle into that posture first. Back is straight, not rigid. Head is tilted a little bit forward. Lips together, teeth apart a little bit. Tongue where the teeth meet the roof of the mouth. We meditate with eyes open, rest the gaze resting lightly on whatever's in front of it, not intensely focused, not spaced out. Unfocused, not spaced out, not unfocused. And breathing through the nose. Those of you who are new, it helps if the hips, if you're on a cushion, if you're seated cross-legged, the hips are either above the knees, especially if you're not very flexible. If your hips are above your knees, that'll help. So you might want a higher cushion. If there's tension in the body, you can shift, and then get comfortable again. And relax. We focus on the breath, where the breath moves above the lip, where the nostrils are, where the air moves in and out. Focus our attention. And when we're aware that we're thinking, we just say to ourselves, back to the breath, and go back, put our attention there again. Or we see that thought like a cloud that has arisen in the sky, and we watch it dissolve back into the sky from which it came. And that sky is limitless, clear, stainless, infinite, calm, blue clarity. We settle into that physically and mentally, and rest in that natural great peace. That mind represents the sky-like nature of our mind, the true essential nature of mind, which is ultimately Buddha nature, which is present in all sentient beings, but often not available or accessible because of our what they call adventitious stains, which is basically the grasping to the concept of a self, grasping to the self and creating a separation between the self and the rest of the world, which is a delusion from a subjective point of view. And Buddha has taught that the nature of things, the true nature of things, ultimate reality is non-dual reality, and nothing is separate from anything else. And we are not separate from anything else. If there's noises in the house or outside that are distracting, use them the same way, or work with them the same way that you work with the thought, right? Recognize it and then just let it go. Just watch it dissolve. Or go back to the breath. But just notice that you're distracted. That's the key. Rather than just be unconscious to the distraction, that you're involved in the distraction, resenting it, judging it in a certain way or qualifying it, you know, meaning, you know, relating to its qualities or being repulsed by its qualities or rejecting it and being annoyed by the qualities of the distraction. Just notice it and let it go. Back to the breath. Recognize the fact that you're thinking. Apply the technique. Watch the cloud dissolve, settle back into the sky. Sky-like nature of mind. Again, if your body's really feeling tense and strained in certain spots, you can shift your weight, shift the position a little bit, settle back into it. You don't have to feel locked into anything. You don't have to feel locked where you can't move at all. Okay, wonderful. I'm going to read something from. There's a really good Instagram page called jangchub.norbu. JANGCHUB.NORBU. Jangchub Norbu. This is a quote from Zantra Khenchen Rinpoche, who we talk about often in this class. So on the Solidago Productions website, which you used to log into this class, there's a list of teachers and books, and Zantra Khenchen Rinpoche is on there. Those of you who are looking for further reading, looking for teachers, that's one resource. Those of you who are new, this class really started because some people who followed me on Instagram were requesting meditation instruction. So I asked my teacher, Garchen Rinpoche, I told him about this, that people were requesting instruction. He said, if you want to do that, then you should, just give people meditation instruction. It started off very completely secular, not meditation, certainly can be done outside of any Buddhist context. That's how we started. But because of interest from the people doing the class who are interested in certain Buddhist, ideas and concepts, I told Garchen Rinpoche again that people were asking, and he said, you can talk about certain Buddhist ideas, but keep the focus on the mind, because Buddha is not the name of a man. Buddha is the name of the mind, which is going back to kind of what I said about that sky-like nature of mind being our true nature and ultimately Buddha nature. So really we try to, the focus of the class is on the mind. Victoria and I, we can teach meditation. Meditation is, a pretty simple technique. Simple doesn't mean easy, but the basic mechanical technique of, meditation, we can teach you. But as far as Buddhist concepts, we're not teaching Buddhism. We're discussing things that we've learned from our teachers, both teachers that we've read, starting with the Buddha himself and teachers throughout the centuries, and teachers that we've been in the presence of or met, and gone to their teachings, and especially ones that we see on YouTube, which is now very, very easy. So if the Buddhist concepts we talk about are of interest, really the most important thing is to find an authentic teacher of an authentic lineage. Victorian and I are far from that. We're not authentic teachers. We're not teachers of Buddhism. We're fellow students, and who are just discussing stuff that we've learned, as we have digested them and tried to understand them. But if it does call to you or is of interest, really the best thing is to find the teachers. And you can see if they're in your area. Sometimes a lot of these teachers travel to different cities. If you go on YouTube, you can watch teachings. You can get on email lists and find out when there's teachings. There's retreats that you can do now online, virtual retreats on Zoom. There's many, many ways to receive the teachings. Okay, so this is from Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche, who is alive in our world. He's an authentic teacher of an authentic lineage. He's brilliant and really understands, I think, the modern world and the modern mind. Appeals to a lot of younger people as well. I encourage you, if it strikes a chord, to really look into his teachings. It's a quote really about suffering, because the first teaching, the first turning of the wheel, the first teachings of the Buddha, is about suffering, really, The Four Noble Thoughts are the first teachings of the Buddha, and the first of the Four Noble Thoughts is, in life we encounter suffering, right? So Nirvana is beyond extremes, in quotes, which is understood to mean enlightenment is peace. This, of course, misleads many people who have a conventional understanding of peace as in peace and quiet. Peace such as a koi pond Zen garden, mountains and waterfalls, and quiet as in no noise or traffic on a weekend getaway with a do not disturb sign on the door. For others, the peace that is thought of as enlightenment is thought to be personified by one who smiles and walks gently and is mindful in all his or her conduct. These concepts of peace are extreme ideas because the so-called peace depends on particular conditions. Nirvana is not that kind of peace. Nirvana is beyond extremes and conditions, based on the duality of self and phenomena. The peace that is enlightenment is based on the non-duality of no self and no phenomena. It is peaceful because it is free of duality, which is the source of all conflicts. Let's go to a mirror, for example. The moment we step back and accentuate our perception of the clarity of our face over our perception of the emptiness of its reflection, conflict is a given. And conversely, the moment we accentuate our perception of the emptiness of the reflected face over our perception of the clarity of our face, conflict is a given, depending on whether we accentuate the emptiness aspect or the clarity aspect of appearances. We will stray into one of the extreme ideas of either nihilism or eternalism. And then we will construct a thesis, either a nihilistic or an eternalistic one, which will be in opposition to others' thesis, and conflict will ensue. Nirvana, on the other hand, has deconstructed all dualism between appearance and emptiness, between self and phenomena, And in the absence of opposing poles, conflict is also absent. Free of extremes, the peace of Nirvana is non-dual and unconditioned, as it is free of friction because Nirvana has no thesis or agenda to push. So that's a lot of concepts, like emptiness and non-duality. Emptiness being emptiness of inherent existence, so we see ourselves as a solid kind of self-existing being, but in essence, our very existence is so tied into so many other causes and conditions and people and systems that it is very difficult to just say we exist as this one thing unto itself. So that's food for thought. I would say read any of Zanzer Kensei's books, Zanzer Kensei Rinpoche. There's a really good teaching on YouTube that I think will really clarify what I just read to you, because I know it's heavy on certain concepts that are very vast and not just easily graspable. But there's a teaching on YouTube of Zanzer Kensei Rinpoche, and it's called It Depends. So if what I just read is of interest or confusing and you want to really have some clarity on it, go look at this teaching, It Depends, by Zanzer Kensei Rinpoche. So we'll go to some questions. So on the bottom, the toolbar, the Zoom toolbar, there's a Q&A function, and you can ask questions there. And if I have anything to talk about, I will try to. I have not been open to others as I thought I've been. Buddha nature is all around, yet I'm holding on to being closed. Any thoughts how I could be more open? Well, the fact that you know that you're not as open to others as you thought is a big step. So awareness is always the beginning. Our suffering's actually always the beginning, and then the awareness of suffering, might be the key or the door that you walk into onto a path. This kind of practice, which ultimately is cultivating awareness, mindfulness. Mindful of what? Mindful of our own mind, which sounds like a paradox, but it really isn't. Being on the Buddhist path really takes a lot of honesty with yourself and how your mind works and how your ego works and what your ego is attached to. And you really have to start to sift through it in a very fine way, because we can justify lots and lots of things. We can justify behaviors because it's important to our work, to our careers, maintaining certain roles in relationships with loved ones, with family, with friends, lovers, the world, politics, social issues. And it's, to really make any progress on the spiritual path, we have to constantly look at how our ego functioning through the mind really directs our actions of body, speech, and mind all the time. Our shtick, if you will. Which may seem very productive, which may seem very kind, rational, logical, justified, but may in essence not be. So how can you be more open? You be more open by making a conscious decision. So the mindfulness that you're cultivating in this kind of practice and through really getting teachings, you bring to situations with others where in the past, like you said, you have not been open to others as you thought. You're in a situation and you make a commitment, you make an aspiration to be more mindful in situations. Habitual reaction to circumstance is part of this ego trip thing. And by, ego gets a bad rap, and it also gets a really kind of inflated rap. So when we say the ego is a diluted, kind of constructed concept, it doesn't mean low self-esteem. It doesn't mean we should be, think of ourselves as low and bad or nothing. At the same time, it doesn't mean to cherish oneself over everyone else. So you have to bring this kind of awareness into situations where, like, say, for instance, I use this example all the time, like you're getting on the train or you're going into a store and the person in front of you is too slow and you want to get around them, and the way they're taking up space without being aware of others annoys you. Situations like that is really good to bring awareness to, because it might take an extra 5 seconds instead of rushing around them, brushing by them because you're impatient. That extra 5 seconds of just settling, taking a breath, allows something else to happen. Maybe look in the person's eye or they look in your eye. Often people don't expect kind of thoughtfulness from strangers. And a little bit of that can really surprise people in very positive ways. So it's basically, how can you be more open? By bringing your awareness and making a commitment to it, to experiment with it. Not rely on the default habitual mechanisms all the time. I hope that's clear. As you dedicate your practice to a teacher, how important is it to understand the lineage of the teacher and feel a connection to the lineage before dedicating your practice? Well, there's a couple of things in this question. Before dedicating your practice, before committing to a teacher, Buddha really encouraged people to very much examine the teacher, for quite a bit of time before you commit. Meaning, don't just dive in based on a reputation. Don't just dive in based on the number of followers or the number of centers this teacher has or how famous this teacher is. Really dive in after you've investigated, been to a lot of teachings, watched a lot of teachings, see how you relate. And it's not about trying to see if someone's bad or corrupt, or it's really seeing what resonates with you, karmic connections, perhaps, So first of all, yes. At the same time, you should understand the lineage. You should see the more immediate threads, your teacher's teacher, the teacher's teacher's teacher, and understand where that lineage is coming from and if that inspires you. Because when you do start seeing the lines, the successive teacher to student relationship that has been handed down now to you, it can be very, very inspiring. And that inspiration can really help deepen your practice. In Tibetan Buddhist tradition, especially Vajrayana practices, devotion is a very big aspect of the teaching. Now, in devotion, I don't mean blind devotion. I don't mean idolatry or worship or that kind of reverence as holy, that kind of thing. Even when they use honorific titles like His Holiness, His Eminence. Remember, those are translations from either Tibetan or Sanskrit. So you have to think a little bit outside of the Western kind of definitions of these words. All sentient beings have Buddha nature. When you become devoted to a teacher, you're really devoting. The devotion comes, sure, because the teacher is the form of the Buddha. The teacher is more important than the Buddha because it's the teacher that's going to give you the teachings in this lifetime, right? So the devotion really is to the lineage, which ultimately is to the Buddha, which ultimately, Buddha is not the name of a man, it's the name of mind, is devotion to your own Buddha nature. So the deeper the devotion goes, the more effective the flow of the teachings from the lineage, from the teacher to the student becomes. It becomes like the wind beneath your sails. I have explored a couple of teachers and schools of Buddhism over the past few years. How did you know when you had found your teacher lineage and wanted to stick with them? Is it acceptable to follow multiple teachers from multiple practices? I mean, this kind of follows up on what I just said, but how do you know? You know, sometimes it's a bit like falling in love. How do you know when you're in love? You know what I mean? It's that instinctual, it's something really opens up. There's this real connection. Sometimes you just stumble on a teacher. Sometimes you have sought out teachers and you find one that really kind of connects to your, to your mind. Is it acceptable to follow multiple teachers? Yes. You should, from multiple practices, maybe. I mean, I stick to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition just because there are so many traditions in the world that we only have so much time in the day on this earth in this form of body, right? So you really want to have a firm personal practice that you do every day, and that I think it's a little easier to do that when it's focused on a teacher, on a lineage. But there are many lineages within Tibetan Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism, there's four main branches: the Kagyu, the Gelugpa, the Nyingma, and the Sakya. Even within those four, there are many. Like Garchen Rinpoche, my teacher, is in the Kagyu lineage, but the Drikung Kagyu lineage. So even in the Kagyu, which is one of the four main branches, there are many lineages. So, but I've read some books on Zen Buddhism a little bit. Suzuki and Thich Nhat Hanh, who was from Vietnam. And there's, very, very valuable wisdom from those traditions. What is important is to make a connection with a teacher. In Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they call the root guru, which means when you officially become a Buddhist, you take refuge. You make refuge vows. You basically take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha, of course, Shakyamuni Buddha, but in some ways it's also the teacher. The Dharma, the teachings, and the Sangha, which is the community, the congregation, if you will, of fellow Buddhists. And when you take refuge, you say refuge vows with a teacher, and they have you repeat vows. Also repeat after me, and I take refuge in the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha. And the teacher that you take vows often becomes your root guru, they say. Your root teacher, your root lama. And that's a very special connection. But even, I took refuge vows with Garchen Rinpoche. I consider him my root guru, right? But even so, I go to and watch and read teachings from many different lamas. But that root guru connection, especially in Vajrayana tradition, which is mostly Tibetan Buddhism is mostly Vajrayana tradition, that connection is essential. One of the four immeasurables is joy, yet many Buddhist students seem very serious and to express little joy. Am I misunderstanding the word joy in this context? I don't know what you're basing on that judgment that many Buddhist students seem very serious and to express little joy. I haven't found that. I've been around a lot of Buddhist students and a lot of Buddhist teachers that express a great deal of joy. The joy we're talking about in the four immeasurables is the joy of others having happiness, you know. So it's not, kind of the joy of going to, necessarily the joy of like going to a great meal, or it can be, but we're really talking about joy in the happiness of others, and taking, the, making aspirations that they have joy, and we rejoicing. That word is a good word, rejoicing in the happiness of others, rejoicing in the success of others, rejoicing in the good fortune of others. I hope that's clear. But I don't find that many Buddhist students. I think many Buddhist students are serious, but being serious doesn't mean to lack joy. I mean, maybe I seem really serious, but that's just because I'm trying to sound intelligent and like I know what I'm talking about. That's my shtick, you know. But it does give me great joy to participate in these sessions with you all. The fact that many people come together um, to commit to this practice and investigate these teachings gives me great joy, because it's very meaningful to me, and sharing it and learning, because I learn a lot from participating in these, trying to communicate and hearing your comments and questions and things. Okay, the name of the teacher. Okay, look in the chat, Nick, if you will spell out Zantsar Khyentse Rinpoche. In the chat function, there's a little button. Go in there, and maybe later in the class, Nick will put the teacher's name. Should I always meditate in the same place? If you're a beginner, it'll help. The best thing you can do is to make this a routine, something you do every day or almost every day. And that helps if there's a little place. I mean, if you have a section of your house that you can set up with a cushion, maybe a statue or a photograph, an image, a candle. So that space is dedicated, even if it's a little corner or something, or a window, it's dedicated to practice. So when you go to that place, your body and mind kind of already kind of tune themselves to practice. Of course, if you travel, and I travel a lot, I mean, I spend half my life in hotel rooms and stuff. So what I do is I bring a little traveling shrine kit. So I have the images of my teacher and other, the Buddha, Padmasambhava, His Holiness Dalai Lama. I'll have a little Guru Rinpoche statue, and like a silk that I put down, and I put that. And when I go into a hotel, one of the first things I do is set up a little, and I make it on top, sometimes windowsill, sometimes I'll take like stools and then put a towel and then put the silk over that. Sometimes I'll use my suitcase to make the little shrine, and then I put water with a glass in the morning as an offering. And just having that in the hotel room immediately gives me a little bit of ground, because when you travel, the ground is a little bit pulled out from underneath you. And then I'll put the cushion, and I know that's the place where I'll sit. Can you recommend any Buddhist center in New York? I don't really go to regular Buddhist centers in New York. Tibet House has traveling teachers that travel. That's very good. Maybe just Google Tibetan Buddhist Center, New York, but I'm not really sure of places that have regular teachings. There's a few in Queens that are really supported by the Tibetan community in Queens. Maybe Google that, Tibetan Buddhist Center, Queens. But Tibet House, get on their email list, because they have a lot of really good traveling teachers. Can you recommend Instagram accounts? I mentioned that one, Jang Chub Normal, Jang Chub, JANGCHUB.Norbu, and also Pema Lotus, PEMALOTUS. Siddhartha's Intent is a good one as well. That's Zancha Khyentse Rinpoche's organization. As you started teaching us during shutdown 2 years ago, actually that was 3 years ago. It seems like it's gone by pretty quickly. This study has helped during this tough period of our business. We are all interrelated. Solidarity. So is Buddha nature ultimately empty? Yes, but you have to understand that emptiness is a translation, English translation of this concept of shunyata. So shunyata is much more about dependent arising, non-duality, interdependence, not existing inherently from its own side, things like that. There's a class from a couple of years ago on our YouTube meditation with Michael Imperioli with Vesna Wallace. So go through the archives. Vesna Wallace taught a class here with us on shunyata, emptiness, and she goes into it in great detail, much better than I can. The longer I sit, the more I find out about my dualistic lifestyle. Dualistic lifestyle, that's creating a lot of suffering. And you talk about how learning about the precepts are important in the practice. The longer you sit, meaning, yeah, this is what happens when you sit and when you meditate, you start seeing, you start seeing that dualism. I mean, that's a really good sign if you're actually seeing the fact of what dualism is. Now, to really integrate, realize the concept of non-dualism is a tall order that may or may not, you may not really embody that in this lifetime, or maybe you will. But knowing that that is ultimate reality, what it can do is inspire us in different ways to live our lives, right? It can open us, like the first question we talked about, how to be open to other individuals. It can open us to different experiences with other individuals. It can kind of tap into compassion for ourselves and for others. It can shed light a little bit on how we operate in the world and how we relate to the ego. So I think that's how, and it can inspire us to want to practice, to want to have some kind of liberation from these habitual concepts and patterns that have really shaped and ruled us and our lives, our minds and lifestyles. Is the Tibetan Book of the Dead worth reading or should it be ignored? So the title of that book is not really the Tibetan Book of the Dead. That's an English translation and kind of misleading. It's the real title of that book is Liberation in the Bardo through Hearing, or Liberation through Hearing in the Bardo. It's meant to be read to someone who is in the process of dying or has just died. Is it worth reading? Why not? But I would say before reading that, read Zancha Khyentse Rinpoche. We'll go back to him again. We seem to be going to him very, very often. We can read his book, which is called Living is Dying. He talks a bit about the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So I would say read that. It's very, very, very accessible. Tibetan Book of the Dead is a bit difficult, but I think if you read Zancha Khyentse's book, Living is Dying, that can be a good introduction to this concept of liberation through hearing in the Bardo. It's going to come out in an audiobook read by me, not to plug me, but to plug the audiobook, because I think it's really, the fact that it's an audiobook is really accessible and good. I hope I did a decent job on it. We just recorded it last week. But those of you who find audiobooks easier, it'll be out in an audiobook through Shambhala Publications pretty soon. I have recently been faced with grief in a way I have never experienced in my 23 years of life. How might one find clarity within the impermanence of all things when challenged with the seemingly permanent nature of death? Well, the first thing you should think about from a Buddhist point of view is that death is not permanent, that death is not, when you talk to real practitioners, like the Buddha, like the lamas, the teachers, they have absolutely no fear of death. Like they don't see it as dying. It's like changing clothes, because mind does not die. The mind, uh, has never been, it's always been and always will be. It's the self and the concept of the self that is temporary. So when they talk about rebirth, it's not the self that's being reborn. It's this continuity of consciousness of mind. So you start to think about those things. So when you talk about impermanence of all things, all compounded things are impermanent, right? Like the body is compounded. It's a conglomeration of elements, that have coalesced into this kind of human form. The mind, though, is not compounded. The mind is like space. Space, has not been created and cannot be really destroyed, right? Cannot be destroyed. So grief is a very real thing, though, and you have to allow yourself to feel grief. Even when we talk about life and the self being like a delusion, not really inherently existing, there's still the fact of grief. There's the great teacher, Marpa. Marpa was a great Tibetan Buddhist teacher whose student, Milarepa, is really one of the most, maybe the most famous Tibetan Buddhist saint, really, if you will. Marpa was a farmer, besides being this hidden teacher, really, So Marpa had a son, and when Marpa's son died, Marpa was inconsolably grieving. And one of his students said, you've been teaching me how life is like a dream, and my perception is diluted, and the fact of self is a compounded, dependent, arising thing that doesn't really exist. Why? And if everything is an illusion, why are you crying? Why are you so distraught? Why are you grieving so much? And Marpa said, because this was a really great illusion. Meaning he loved his son, despite his son being, part of this illusion or delusion and things. It did not, his karma in this life, in that lifetime that he was experiencing, then still had attachment, still had love. People sometimes ask, often we talk about detachment, that attachment being the cause of suffering. Well, there you have a really good example. Marpa, who was a real realized being, still in this human form, there was an element of attachment that he had to loved one. So it's almost like we're, we make aspirations to understand these things, impermanence, and accept it. Yet still we're gonna, we're gonna feel things, and I think the best thing you can do is really, going through this grief, let that awaken compassion in others who are going through the same thing, and then try to, be there for them. Is sobriety required to reach higher understanding? That's a very tricky question. Certain teachers may want their students to not consume any intoxicants, or not, become intoxicated. Now, does someone become intoxicated after drinking a glass of wine? Not necessarily, right? If you're an addict and your addiction is out of control, that's going to be a block to practice, to progress, probably, right? If you're someone who has a glass of wine here and there, I don't think that's an issue at all. That's something you have to decide for yourself. If there's addiction and if there's a problem, it certainly can become an impediment, right? When you talk about certain drugs, illegal drugs, you have to think about kind of say you're buying cocaine or whatever. Obviously, that's a very dangerous drug and it's very easy to become addicted to, and that kind of pursuit can really derail your spiritual progress. There's also a very karmic connection to very negative, destructive chain of events. There's a lot of murder and death and violence connected to the trafficking of certain illegal drugs that you're kind of supporting in a certain way by participating in that, which has to be considered, right? But then there's the concept of the idea of psychedelics, people having psychedelic experiences. I've never heard from any Buddhist teacher recommending psychedelics as a mode of practice, or as an insight towards practice, towards teachings. But if some kind of experience like ayahuasca or mushrooms or something awakens some kind of inspiration towards a higher, I don't know what, knowledge or connection to oneness, and a glimpse of some kind of non-dual reality. I mean, that the fact that inspired you is a good thing. I don't think taking that kind of thing every day is going to help practice. Some people ask, what about smoking marijuana while meditating? Meditation is meditation. Getting high is getting high. I'm not saying getting high is bad or good. I'm just saying there's an you're altered, your mental state, and really meditation, you're trying to get down to the essential nature of it. So sobriety is something, is good to address with a teacher if you have made a connection to a teacher. But it's, again, we're trying to really be honest with ourselves and see where our compulsions, our habits, ultimately addictions have gotten in the way, if that's an issue. But it's not like an edict. Tibetan Buddhism, at least, because I don't know about the other traditions very much. It's not like there's, even though like the Dalai Lama was also the political leader of Tibet. So he wasn't just the spiritual leader. He was a political leader. So it's a little bit different. It's not like the Dalai Lama is the boss of all Tibetan Buddhism, and what he says has to be followed by everyone else. Although there is tremendous reverence, pretty much, from all Tibetan Buddhists and Tibetan Buddhist lineages and stuff. The lineage you're in, it's your teacher really is giving you the teachings that he received from his teacher in his lineage, and that's really where the teachings come down from. It's very different than, say, the Catholic Church, where the Pope is setting all the rules and everyone's answering to him. It's very different. So you may get different, like I said, some teachers may said they really recommend no intoxicants or that kind of thing. I come from a Catholic family and I'm afraid to be judged to start practicing Buddhism. Any advice on how to go about it? Maybe don't tell anybody in the beginning. Maybe start in secret and just see how it works for you. Often, if you really take to the teachings and they start to really inform your life, people may see a little bit of difference in you and ask what's going on, and you may inspire people in your family to investigate it. But, maybe start in secret, or maybe you just have to get over the judgment of your family. Obviously, um, you can't let that fear of judgment outweigh, your own spiritual progress. So it's going to take a little bit of leap of courage for you. But you don't have to kind of flaunt it or, debate about it. You can be very quiet about it in the beginning. Are there different levels of refuge? Yeah, well, there's different vows for lay people and those who are ordained. When you become a monk or nun, you take, you know, different vows. There's much more precepts. Like monks don't use intoxicants. Monks are celibate. But there are very high lamas that are not, and practitioners that are not monastics, that are married, that have children, um, that may drink alcohol. So there are different vows for different. Yes, or definitely for those who are ordained. There's a lot of vows that they take. Some may take a vow of poverty, that kind of thing. Um, I have read common vows are doing no harm, logically meaning to adopt a vegetarian or vegan diet. Not all Buddhists are vegetarian or vegan. When you take refuge vows, you're basically taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. Then there's something called the Bodhisattva vow, which, if you're going into the Mahayana path of Buddhism, you say, basically saying, I will not until all beings attain enlightenment. I will not kind of just disappear into the Pure Land, but I'm going to keep coming back. I make an aspiration. Until samsara is emptied, I will bring benefit to all beings who have been my mother. All beings who have been my mother means because we've had limitless lives in the past, mathematically almost. That means because we've had billions of lifetimes, all beings at one point or another were our mother or father or child or something, which is a good way to kind of start to think about compassion, and connection to other beings. So you're making an aspiration until samsara is emptied, meaning until everyone becomes enlightened. I'll bring benefit to others, meaning, in consecutive lifetimes, try to be a benefit, commit to the Dharma. The best thing you can do to help others is to become enlightened, and then you can really understand what will benefit all beings. That's another vow. Then there's what they call the Vajrayana or tantric vows, which are a whole different thing, which you take in different empowerments, different kind of there's vows you take within different empowerments of the Vajrayana that your teacher gives you, but those things have to be explained by someone who actually teaches it. Okay, I think we've answered gone through all the questions. Okay. Thank you very much. Let's thank you, Nick Solidio, our producer, for his kindness and generosity for making this possible. Let's dedicate the merit from today's class for the benefit of all beings. By this merit may all beings attain the state of enlightenment and conquer the enemies of faults and delusions. May they be liberated from this ocean of samsara and its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Won't see you next week. See you in 2 weeks.